On a rainy night in 1978, two men knocked a middle-aged loan shark to a Mulberry Street sidewalk and shot him 4 times in the head in front of a block full of people who all swore they saw nothing. You've seen him before if you've watched The Irishman. He's the quiet man in the glasses, the one the movie sends along on the big hit, while somebody else does the actual killing. The film shows his death too. It even gets the year wrong, and it never once tells you the real reason 2 men came for him that night, or what this forgettable little man knew that was worth killing for. The film gets the little man right, at least on the surface. Louis Conchelmi plays him with the glasses and the mild, put-upon face, a loan shark who looks like he balances your books, and that part is honest. The real Briguglio was short, slim, wore glasses, and spoke with a heavy Jersey accent. Dan Moldea, the one reporter who ever sat across a table from him, called him short but wiry, and said flatly that he did not look like a muscle man. That was the whole trick. The accountant face was the uniform, and the movie keeps it because it's true and because it's disarming. What the movie can't afford to do is tell you what was underneath it, because underneath it was a Genovese enforcer who had spent the better part of 2 decades doing the work nobody wants their name attached to. On paper, Sally Bugs was a business agent for Teamsters, Local 560 in Union City, New Jersey. That's a real job with a desk and a title and a salary and a parking spot. In practice, he answered to Anthony Provenzano, the caporegime everyone called Tony Pro, who ran that local like a private kingdom, and the desk was camouflage. Briguglio was a loan shark, an enforcer, and when it was needed, a killer. The union title made all of that look like a normal job. I'd argue that's the detail the film can't sit with, because a meek killer is far more unsettling than a frightening one. The frightening ones announce themselves. You cross the street. A man who looks like he does your taxes and kills people for a living is a much harder thing to keep in your head at the same time. And Sally Bugs lived in exactly that gap for almost 20 years. So you understand what he really was. You go back to 1961 to a farm in Kerhonkson, New York, and a man named Anthony Castellito. Castellito was the secretary-treasurer of Local 560, well-liked by the rank and file. And being well-liked is a liability when the man above you wants the union entirely to himself. Provenzano decided Castellito was a threat. So Castellito was lured up to that farm, deep in the countryside, and they didn't pick a farm by accident. You pick a place like that precisely because there is no one for miles to hear anything. What happened there is the reason Sally Bugs earned the reputation the glasses hid. The government's case, which took the better part of 15 years to assemble, rested on the testimony of a man named Salvatore Sino, one of the participants, who eventually flipped and disappeared into witness protection to say it out loud. Sino told the court he'd helped lure Castellito to the farm, and that about a week beforehand, he'd sat in Provenzano's office with Konigsberg and Briguglio to arrange it. On the farm, according to the case, Briguglio struck Castellito in the head with a lead-filled hose and then helped strangle him with a rope. The body was never recovered. There was no grave and nothing for the family to bury. A man who ran a union local one week was simply gone the next, and the paperwork carried on without him. And here is where you see how the machine actually turned. Within a few months of Castellito disappearing, Briguglio was appointed a business agent of that very same Local 560. The killing didn't just remove a rival, it opened a job in that same local, and within months, Sally had it. The film has no room for any of this. It keeps Sally as the nervous man in glasses and never lets you see that the same man had just helped beat a rival to death to land the job. His promotion and Castellito's murder were the same event seen from two ends. That was how those locals ran. The promotions and the killings were the same memo, and everybody who got the memo knew how to read it. The case took a decade and a half to build, and it took that long for one simple reason. There was no body. Harold Konigsberg, the New Jersey racketeer recruited for the job alongside Sally, eventually went down for it too. But a murder with no corpse is a murder you have to prove entirely out of people's mouths. And people in that world do not open their mouths. It took a participant willing to trade his own freedom for a new name and a new life before the Castellito killing turned from a rumor into a courtroom. That's the world Sally Bugs moved through comfortably for the whole of his adult life. He wasn't reckless and he wasn't loud. He was patient, which in that world was the more dangerous thing to be. That's the man the film reduces to a nervous errand boy in glasses. And what the government believed he did next is the thing that put a target on his own back. Stick with me here, because what the federal government actually believed Sally Bugs did in the summer of 1975 is bigger than anything the Irishman puts on the screen. And once you know it, the tidy little cleanup scene turns completely inside out. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa walked across a parking lot outside a restaurant in suburban Detroit and was never seen again. No body was ever found, no one was ever arrested, and half a century later, there is still no answer. It is the single most famous disappearance in the history of American organized crime, and the case remains open. When the FBI began pulling the thread, it didn't lead deeper into Detroit. It led east to New Jersey, to Provenzano's crew, and to the Briguglio brothers. An informant named Ralph Picardo, a man who had driven for Provenzano, told investigators the crew had been dispatched to deal with Hoffa. Sally's brother Gabriel allegedly carried word of the sanctioned hit, and in the government's working theory, the man at the sharp end of it, the one who did the actual killing, was Salvatore Briguglio. Federal prosecutors came to believe that Sally Bugs, the little man in the glasses, personally put Jimmy Hoffa in the ground. Now set that next to the movie for a second. In The Irishman, the trigger belongs to Frank Sheeran, the Irishman himself, who confesses the entire thing to author Charles Brandt decades later, and lets the film build almost 3.5 hours on his word. Sally Bugs is in that scene too, but only as an escort, a body sent along to make sure the job gets done. The record flips the casting completely. The leading real-world theory makes Briguglio the shooter and Sheeran the man, telling a good story near the end of his life. I think that's the most interesting fact this entire subject hides in plain sight. A film that sells itself as the true, at last account of who killed Jimmy Hoffa, hands the trigger to the man narrating the film and gives the man the government actually suspected a walk-on and an early death. Whether or not Sheeran was ever within 100 miles of Hoffa, the people who spent careers chasing this had a different name written down, and it was the one on the mailbox in Jersey. In the movie's staging, Hoffa is caught completely off guard when Sheeran turns up with Hoffa's own foster son, Chucky O'Brien, at the wheel and Sally Bugs riding along, and the sit-down that was supposed to patch up a feud becomes the last drive Hoffa ever takes. It's a beautifully built scene. It is also one man's version, shot and lit and scored as though it were the confirmed record. And remember the year I said the film gets wrong. It places Sally's own death in 1979 when he was actually killed in 78. That's a small slip on its own, but it fits the bigger pattern. The movie is reshaping the real calendar to fit a single confession, sanding down the timeline until it matches the story Sheeran told at the end of his life. And it isn't only Sally the record keeps pointing at. His brother Gabriel was in that same crew, part of what federal sources flatly call the Provenzano's hit squad, and Gabriel took the fifth in front of the grand jury right alongside him. The Briguglios came as a set. The movie shows one nervous man in a doorway. The investigators were looking at two brothers working the same crew, and Briguglio behaved at every turn exactly like a man with something to keep buried, brought before a Detroit grand jury looking into the disappearance. He took the fifth. Innocent men usually answer the questions and go home annoyed. Taking the fifth in the middle of a murder probe just keeps the investigators parked at the end of your driveway, and that's where Sally kept them. Then, in October of 1976, Dan Moldia drove all the way out from Michigan and got something almost no one ever got. Hours on tape, in a room with Briguglio himself, Sally denied everything, and he did it in that flat, careful voice of a man who's said the words before. His allegations were very serious, he told Moldia, and he was very concerned about them, of course, but since he'd had nothing to do with it, he wasn't too concerned about it. He even offered that he wished whoever really did it would come forward, so the heat would finally lift off him and Tony. 2 years later, he was face down on Mulberry Street, and the heat never lifted at all. There is one wrinkle in his account that never sat right with anyone. He first said he'd been playing cards at the Union Hall the night Hoffa vanished. Later, he said he'd actually left early because his mouth was aching from oral surgery. It's a small revision, but you generally only bother revising an alibi if you needed the alibi in the first place. Moldia, for his part, never once believed the Sheeran version. He put his conclusion into print about as bluntly as a reporter can manage. The government still believes Salvatore Briguglio murdered Jimmy Hoffa, he wrote, and so do I. Which brings us all the way back to Mulberry Street and to the real reason two men in hooded jackets came for a middle-aged loan shark on a rainy Tuesday night. Look at the calendar. By March of 1978, Sally Bugs was under indictment for the Castellito killing, set to stand trial alongside Provenzano up in Kingston, New York. That charge carried a life sentence. And a man staring down a life sentence is the single most dangerous animal in that entire world, because for the first time, he has a reason to trade. Everything he knew about Castellito, about the workings of Local 560, about a parking lot in Detroit, had suddenly turned into currency he could spend to save himself. Investigators quietly hoped he might finally talk. Somebody clearly was afraid of the exact same thing, so they didn't wait for the trial. Weeks before it, on an open block outside the Andrea Doria Social Club, right beside the lit front windows of a busy restaurant, the two men closed in on him from behind. The witnesses never fully agreed on the details. Some said the men spoke to him first, tried to walk him somewhere, and that a few words turned into an argument before one of them struck him. Others swore no words were exchanged at all, that the hooded men simply came up and knocked him flat, but everyone agreed on the ending. The guns came out and fired into his face and chest. He'd gone out that night in a brown leather jacket and a plaid shirt, dressed like a man running an ordinary errand. He was rushed to Bellevue and pronounced dead when he arrived. The shooters ran a short way north toward Broome Street, folded themselves into that light blue Mercury, and drove across the river into New Jersey and clean out of the case forever. And notice how it was done. Nobody drove Sally Bugs out to a quiet farm the way he'd once helped drive Castellito. Nobody made him disappear into an unmarked hole. They killed him in the most public place they could find, in the heart of Little Italy, on a lit street, in front of a restaurant packed with witnesses. A hit like that isn't about hiding anything. It's meant to be seen and understood by everyone in the life as a message. And look at the symmetry of it. Sally had spent his career making men vanish where no one could look, and he was killed in the one spot designed for the whole neighborhood to watch. I don't think that was an accident. And then the block did its part, which was to see nothing. This was not a quiet alley at 4 a.m. This was Little Italy at night. People at their dinners, people out on the sidewalk, the restaurant windows full of faces. Every one of them told detectives the identical thing. They couldn't identify the gunmen. They couldn't even describe them. That isn't ordinary fear. That's an entire neighborhood that knew exactly what it had just seen and knew exactly why it was going to forget it by morning. The wall went up on its own without a single order, and behind that wall, the case died right there with the man on the pavement. Provenzano didn't get away clean either. That June, months after Sally Bugs was in the ground, Tony Pro was convicted of the Castellito murder and sentenced to life. He died in a federal prison out near Lompoc, California in 1988, a heart attack at 71. But he went away for the man he'd killed back in 1961. Not for anything connected to Sally. No one was ever charged with Briguglio's murder. No one was ever publicly named for it. 4 decades on, it remains officially, permanently, an open file in a drawer in Manhattan. If you like the stories the movies quietly leave on the cutting room floor, subscribe and I'll have another one waiting for you next week. Here's the part that stays with me about Sally Bugs. 2 of the largest unsolved silences in mob history run straight through the same small man in the glasses. Hoffa walked into a parking lot and out of the world, and the person the federal government believed had put him there was Salvatore Briguglio. Then Briguglio himself was cut down on a public street, and 100 people decided at once that they'd seen nobody. He may genuinely have been the one man still breathing who could have answered the single biggest question American organized crime ever produced. Instead, somebody made certain that answer rode off in the back of a Mercury and never came back. The film handed him a killer with a name and a face and a tidy place. In the montage, real life handed him an open case file and a block full of neighbors staring at their plates. He knew things that were worth killing for, and whoever came for him made sure he'd carry every last one of them into the ground.